My breath hitched, a tiny desperate sound that was swallowed by the opulent silence of Lucien Vale's office. The city lights of New York glittered outside the panoramic window, a million indifferent eyes to my internal earthquake. My boss, Lucien, stood before me, his silhouette framed by the urban glow, a predator in a perfectly tailored suit. "So, you want me to be your fiancée?" My voice sounded foreign, thin and reedy, completely unlike the confident journalist I pretended to be. He turned, and the intensity of his gaze was like a physical blow. Those eyes, the color of
Oh my
storm
goodness.
clouds just before they break,
Is this
bore into
real?
me.
It is.
They always held a secret,
Say
a
you'll
depth
marry
I
me.
could never quite decipher, but tonight they were raw. "It's a temporary arrangement, Arielle." His voice was a low rumble, a sound that usually sent a shiver of respect down my spine, but tonight it was laced with something else. Urgency. A quiet desperation that contradicted his usual impenetrable calm. "For the investor retreat. My family, they expect me to be settled. It's crucial for my standing within the company. A temporary arrangement. Why? A performance." My stomach churned. This wasn't some minor fib. This was a colossal, heart-stopping deception. I, Arielle Stone, who built her career on uncovering truth, was being asked to embody a falsehood of monumental proportions. My gaze dropped to the polished mahogany desk where a small velvet box lay open. Inside, nestled on white satin, was a ring. Not a modest, believable prop ring, but a dazzling, impossible diamond that seemed to absorb all the light in the room and throw it back with a fierce, challenging sparkle. It looked like a king's ransom, a silent scream of commitment that belied the word fake. "That's a bit much, isn't it, Lucien?" I finally managed, gesturing vaguely at the blinding rock. "For a temporary arrangement." A muscle worked in his jaw. "My family is traditional. They value appearances. A significant symbol is necessary." "A significant symbol," I echoed, my mind racing. This wasn't just about appearances for a business trip. This felt heavier, darker. The way his eyes kept darting to my hand, the way he seemed to hold his breath as if waiting for my refusal. He took a step closer and my instincts screamed, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. His scent, usually a subtle, expensive cologne, seemed sharper tonight, almost wild. It filled my senses, making my head swim. "Arielle," he said, his voice softer now, a silken persuasion that was far more dangerous than his stern commands. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. This retreat, it's a necessary evil. And I need you by my side. I need you by my side." The words resonated, shaking something deep inside me. He wasn't asking one of his other capable executives. He was asking me. The journalist who often challenged his decisions. The woman who worked late into the night, fueled by caffeine and a relentless pursuit of stories. I looked at the ring again. It was beautiful, undeniably. But it also felt like a trap, a gilded cage I was about to step into. I imagined wearing it, the weight of the lie pressing down on me, the judging eyes of his powerful family. The thought was terrifying. But then I thought of my dwindling savings account, the rent that was due, the ever-present threat of being laid off from a dying industry. I thought of the prestigious byline this could give me, the stories I could chase if I just had a little more financial security. And then I met his gaze again. There was a flicker there, something almost vulnerable in his storm cloud eyes, a silent plea that I couldn't ignore. He was always so controlled, so untouchable. To see him even remotely asking for help for me to help him, it chipped away at my resolve. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word a small exhalation of surrender. "I'll do it." A wave of relief washed over his face, so profound it surprised me. He extended his hand, picking up the ring. As he reached for my left hand, his fingers, surprisingly warm and strong, wrapped around mine. The diamond felt cold against my skin, heavy, binding. It wasn't just a ring, it was a promise, a claim. And as his thumb brushed over my knuckles, a strange electric current shot through me, making every nerve ending tingle. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear but from something else entirely, something I couldn't name. I looked at the ring, sparkling on my finger, a beacon of a life I didn't have, a future I didn't want. But for this week for Lucien I was his fiancée. And as his grip tightened, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn night air snaked down my spine. I had a feeling this fake engagement was going to be anything but simple. The private jet touched down on a secluded airstrip in upstate New York with a jarring thud that mirrored the state of my nerves. Through the window, the sprawling estate of the Vale family emerged from the mist. A fortress of dark stone and ivy that looked more like a medieval castle than a corporate retreat. "Remember the story, Arielle," Lucien said, his voice dropping an octave as the cabin door hissed open. "We met at the Gala in London. We've been private for 6 months. No matter what you hear this weekend, no matter how strange the conversation gets, stay close to me." He reached out, his hand sliding firmly around my waist. The heat of his palm burned through my silk blouse. It wasn't the polite, distant touch of a boss. It was possessive. As we stepped onto the tarmac, a group of men waited for us. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in expensive wool coats, but they didn't look like bankers. They looked like a security detail for a war zone. One man, with hair the color of bone and eyes that seemed to track my pulse, stepped forward. "Lucien," the man said, his voice a low grate. "The council is already gathered. You're late. And you brought company." "My fiancé Silas," Lucien replied, his grip on my waist tightening until I was flush against his side. "Arielle Stone. I expect her to be treated with the respect her title demands." Silas leaned in, sniffing the air subtly. My skin crawled. He wasn't looking at my face, he was looking at the hollow of my throat. "A journalist. Brave of you, brother. Or reckless." "Enough," Lucien snapped, a sound so sharp it made the other men flinch. "Take the bags. We're heading to the Great Hall." The interior of the estate was a labyrinth of cold marble and roaring fireplaces. The air felt heavy, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. As we walked, I noticed other guests, couples dressed in black tie attire, moving with a fluid, predatory grace. They didn't talk, they observed. And every single eye was on the ring on my finger. "Lucien, everyone is staring," I whispered, leaning into him. "Is the diamond too big? I told you it was too much." "It's not the size, Arielle," he muttered, his eyes scanning the room like he was expecting an ambush. "It's what it represents. To them, that ring is a declaration of war." Before I could ask what that meant, a woman in a deep red gown intercepted us. She was stunning, with sharp features and a smile that didn't reach her amber eyes. This was Juliana, Lucien's cousin and a high-ranking executive I'd interviewed once before. "So this is the little human who captured the king's interest," Juliana said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. She reached out to touch my hair, but Lucien swiped her hand away with terrifying speed. "Do not touch her, Juliana," Lucien warned. His eyes seemed to darken, the gray turning to a murky, dangerous charcoal. "Just checking the quality, Lucien," she purred, her gaze sliding to me. "Tell me, Arielle, do you have any idea what you're doing here? Or are you just another lamb led to the slaughter because the shepherd was lonely?" "I'm here because I love him," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I forced myself to look her in the eye. "And I don't appreciate being talked about like I'm not in the room." Juliana laughed, a cold, melodic sound. "Spirited. I like that. But let's see if that spirit holds when the moon reaches its peak. The air gets very thin up here." She drifted away, leaving me trembling. Lucien didn't let go. He led me toward a massive oak door where the sound of low, rhythmic chanting could be heard. What did she mean about the air? I asked, my heart hammering. Lucien stopped and turned me to face him. He took my face in both of his hands. His skin was unnaturally warm, almost feverish. "Listen to me. From this moment on, do not eat or drink anything I haven't tasted first. Do not go into the woods. And under no circumstances are you to take off that ring. Do you understand? Lucien, you're scaring me. This is just a business retreat." "It's a merger, Arielle," he said, his voice a haunted whisper. "And in my world, mergers require a sacrifice of blood. Just stay behind me and I'll make sure it isn't yours." He pushed open the doors and we stepped into a hall filled with hundreds of people, all standing in total silence, waiting for him. The Alpha had arrived and I was the trophy he had brought to the feast. The great hall was less of a ballroom and more of a cathedral to old violent money. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and dark wines, but nobody was eating. They were waiting. As Lucien led me toward the head table, the silence followed us like a physical weight. I could feel the heat radiating off him, a dry, blistering warmth that made the air shimmer. Every man we passed stood a little taller, their nostrils flaring as we walked by. It was the subtle dominance games Lucien had warned me about, but it felt less like corporate posturing and more like dogs sizing up a new hound. "Sit," Lucien commanded softly, pulling out a heavy iron-wrought chair at the center of the dais. I sat, my fingers trembling as I gripped the silver cutlery. A man sat to my left, Marcus, a rival investor, with a jagged scar running from his ear to his jawline. He didn't look at Lucien. He looked at me, specifically at the pulse thrumming in my neck. "A delicate choice, Vale," Marcus said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He reached for a carafe of deep red juice, pouring a glass and sliding it toward me. "Try the pomegranate. It's a specialty of the house. Pure, untainted." I reached for the glass, my throat parched from the dry mountain air, but Lucien's hand shot out, pinning my wrist to the table. The force wasn't painful, but it was absolute. "She's not thirsty," Lucien said, his voice vibrating with a low, dangerous frequency. "It's just juice, Lucien," I whispered, embarrassed by the scene he was making in front of the elite. "I'm actually quite parched." Lucien didn't look at me. He picked up the glass, brought it to his lips and took a long, deliberate sip. His eyes never left Marcus's. After a tense silence, Lucien set the glass down and pushed it away. "The acidity is too high for her," Lucien stated. "Get her water. Bottled. Sealed." Marcus leaned back, a mocking smirk playing on his lips. "So protective. One would think she was made of glass rather than flesh and bone." "To me, she is everything," Lucien replied. The statement hit me like a physical blow. The way he said it, not as a script for a fake engagement but as an undeniable fact of nature. I looked at him, searching for the control freak boss I knew in Manhattan, but he was gone. In his place was a man whose presence seemed to expand to fill the room, a man who looked like he could tear the iron table apart with his bare hands. As the meal progressed, the conversation turned to market shares and bloodline stability. "The merger with the Northern Territories is failing," a woman across the table said, her eyes fixed on me with clinical detachment. "The stock is diluted. We need a fresh infusion of strength to keep the lineage from thinning." "We aren't discussing the bloodlines tonight, Beatrice," Lucien snapped. "Why not?" Marcus interjected, his eyes gleaming. "Your fiancée is a journalist. Surely she understands the importance of a strong legacy. Tell me, Arielle, what do you think of hostile takeovers when the defending party is too weak to hold their ground?" I cleared my throat, trying to regain my professional footing. "In my experience, a takeover is only hostile if the human cost isn't considered. Strength isn't just about power. It's about the ability to protect those within the organization." A ripple of low, guttural laughter went around the table. It wasn't a kind sound. It sounded like the snapping of dry branches. "Protect them." Marcus leaned in, his scent, something musky and metallic, cloying my senses. "In this world, the weak are protected only until they are consumed. Isn't that right, Lucien? Or has your new acquisition made you forget how we handle the runts of the litter?" Lucien's chair screeched against the stone floor as he stood. The room went dead silent. The shadows on the wall seemed to grow, stretching upward as if the firelight itself was afraid of him. "The dinner is over," Lucien announced. He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed my hand, his grip was tight, his skin scorching, and hauled me out of the hall. We moved through the darkened corridors so fast I nearly tripped over my gown. He didn't stop until we reached the heavy oak doors of our shared suite. He shoved the door open, pulled me inside and slammed it shut, locking it with a heavy thud. "What is wrong with you?" I cried, wrenching my hand away. "You were rude, you were territorial, and you treated me like a child in there. If this is about your image, you're failing, Lucien. They think you're a lunatic." He was pacing the room like a caged animal, his chest heaving. He stopped, turning to me, and for a second I thought I saw his eyes flash a brilliant, terrifying gold in the moonlight streaming through the window. "They don't think I'm a lunatic, Arielle," he growled, stepping into my personal space until I was backed against the door. "They think I'm distracted. They think because I chose you I've grown soft. They were testing the air to see if they could snatch you from under my nose." "Snatch me? We're at a corporate retreat, not a kidnapping convention." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot against my lips, and the raw, animal magnetism radiating off him was so strong my knees felt weak. "You don't understand the rules here. You aren't a guest. You're my fiancé. And in this house, that means you belong to the alpha." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with a possessiveness that made my heart stutter. "I am the only thing standing between you and the teeth of this family. Don't you ever, ever, take a drink from another man again." The air in the room felt thick, charged with a heat that wasn't just from the fireplace. I looked up at him, my breath hitching. The line between fake and real was blurring so fast I couldn't find the edge. "Lucien," I whispered, my hand rising to rest on his chest. Beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt, his heart was drumming a frantic, powerful rhythm. "It's just a job. Right?" He didn't answer. He just stared at my mouth, his expression a tortured mix of hunger and restraint, before he turned abruptly and walked toward the balcony, leaving me shivering in the center of the room. Outside, the clouds began to clear, revealing a moon that was almost perfectly, terrifyingly round. I woke up to a room that felt too small, the air heavy with the scent of pine and something metallic. Lucien was gone from the suite, but the indentation on the sofa suggested he hadn't slept in the bed, or perhaps hadn't slept at all. Restless and feeling trapped, I decided to ignore his stay-in-the-room command. I needed air that didn't smell like ancient secrets and suppressed violence. I stepped out into the hallway, my sneakers silent on the stone floors. The estate was eerily quiet, the investors seemingly absent, though the feeling of being watched never left me. I wandered toward the library, hoping to find a local history book that might explain why these finance titans acted like they were in a cult. As I passed a set of heavy velvet curtains, I heard voices, low, guttural, and intense. "He's stalling, Silas," a voice I recognized as Marcus's hissed. "The full moon is tonight. If he doesn't present her to the pack as a true mate, the bloodline claim is void. We can challenge his seat." "The girl is human, Marcus," Silas replied, his voice a bored drawl. "She's a placeholder. A weak screen to hide his lack of a successor. He's obsessed with her because she's a novelty, not a Luna. Obsessed or not, his scent is all over her. He's marked her with that ring. If he won't shift to defend the claim tonight, I'll take her myself. Her blood is pure enough for a secondary line." My blood ran cold. "Mate, secondary line?" I backed away, my heart thundering against my ribs. It sounded like they were talking in some bizarre aristocratic code for a hostile takeover, but the word blood kept coming up far too literally. "Arielle," I shrieked, spinning around. Lucien stood at the end of the hall. He wasn't in his suit today. He wore a thin black t-shirt that clung to the terrifying slabs of muscle on his chest and shoulders. He looked less like a CO and more like a mercenary. "I told you not to leave the suite," he said, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my teeth. "I was just looking for a book," I lied, my voice shaking. "Lucien, Marcus, and Silas. They're in there. They're saying crazy things. They're talking about bloodlines and taking me and calling you an alpha." He moved with a speed that defied logic. 1 second he was 10 feet away. The next he was looming over me, his hand bracing against the wall behind my head. He leaned in, his nose brushing against the skin of my neck just below my ear. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "You smell like fear," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "And you smell like them. Their scent is on the air around you." "Lucien, you're acting like a literal animal," I snapped, trying to push him back. It was like trying to move a mountain. "Tell me what's going on. This isn't finance. This isn't New York. What is this pack?" He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment the mask of the billionaire cracked. There was a raw, primal hunger in his eyes, but also a deep aching protectiveness. "It's an elite society, Arielle," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "One based on old rules. Older than the stock market. Tonight is the final night of the retreat. There will be a ceremony in the woods. You're going to stay in the room. I will lock the door from the outside." "The hell you will. I'm a journalist, Lucien. I don't get locked away while the story is happening." "This isn't a story you want to write," he roared, the sound echoing through the stone corridor like a physical blow. He caught himself, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the stone wall. "If you go out there tonight, I cannot guarantee that the investors will keep their hands off you. Do you understand? To them you are a provocation. A prize to be stolen to prove I am weak." He reached out, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling my head back just enough so I had to look him in the eye. "I bought you that ring to keep you safe. Tells them you are mine. But tonight the moon is stronger than a piece of jewelry. Are you afraid of them?" I whispered. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, the heat coming off him enough to make me dizzy. "I'm not afraid of them, Arielle. I'm afraid of what I'll have to become to protect you from them." He let go of me abruptly, his chest heaving as if he'd just run a marathon. "Back to the room. Now." I went, but as I reached the door I looked back. Lucien was standing in the shadows of the hallway, his eyes glowing with that strange golden light again. I realized then that the control freak obsession wasn't about his image. It was about my survival. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, and the first hint of a massive, bloated moon appeared, I realized I'd left my phone in the library. I needed it to call for a car, to get away from this madness. I waited until I heard Lucien's heavy footsteps head toward the great hall. Then I slipped out. The air outside the suite was different now. It was electric. A low, rhythmic howling started somewhere deep in the forest, and for the first time in my life, I realized that some metaphors are actually warnings. The library was a tomb of shadows. I fumbled along the mahogany tables, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The howling from the woods had grown louder, a primal chorus that made the very glass in the windows vibrate. "Come on, Arielle," I hissed to myself. My fingers finally brushed the cold metal of my phone. I grabbed it, the screen lighting up to reveal 0 bars of service. Of course. Suddenly the lights flickered. A low hum groaned through the walls of the estate and then clack. Total darkness. The silence that followed was worse than the howling. It was a thick, suffocating blanket. I stood frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then I heard it. The sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from the doorway. It wasn't the breathing of a man. It was deeper, more guttural, accompanied by the clicking of claws against the hardwood floor. "Lucien," I whispered, my voice trembling. A low growl was my only answer, a sound that vibrated in the floorboards and traveled up my spine. A pair of eyes ignited in the dark. Not the golden gray of Lucien's human eyes, but 2 glowing amber orbs, burning with a predatory fire. "The little journalist," a voice rasped. It was Marcus, but his voice was distorted, breaking into wet, animalistic snarls between words. "Lost in the dark. Lucien is occupied at the Great Hall trying to keep his throne. He won't notice if a stray lamb goes missing." I backed away, my heel catching on a rug. "Marcus, stop. This isn't funny. If this is some sick hazing ritual." "This is the hunt," he snarled. I heard the sound of fabric ripping, the expensive wool of his suit shedding as his body contorted, bones cracking and reshaping in the dark. I turned and bolted toward the balcony doors, throwing them open. The full moon hung in the sky like a giant, accusing eye, turning the world into a silver and black nightmare. I ran onto the stone terrace, but a massive shape blurred past me, cutting off my exit. It was a wolf. But it was the size of a grizzly bear, with matted gray fur and teeth that looked like daggers. It lunged and I screamed, throwing my arms up to protect my face. Crash. The stone railing of the balcony disintegrated as a second shape, darker, larger and faster, slammed into the gray wolf. The impact sounded like 2 cars colliding. I scrambled back against the wall, watching in a daze of terror. The black wolf was magnificent and terrifying. Every muscle was a cord of tension. Its fur was the color of a starless night. It didn't just fight, it dominated. With a single brutal snap of its jaws, it sent the gray wolf howling into the shrubbery below. The black wolf turned to me. My breath hitched. I knew those eyes. Even through the beast, the storm cloud gray remained, now swirling with a protective fury so intense it felt like heat on my skin. Lucien. I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. The wolf didn't move. It watched me, its chest heaving. Slowly it stepped forward, its massive head dipping to sniff at my hand, specifically the finger where the diamond ring sat. The ring began to glow with a faint, pulsing blue light I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't protecting his image. He wasn't protecting a business deal. He huffed, a warm blast of air that smelled of pine and the cold mountain night. He stepped closer, pressing his large furry shoulder against my side, urging me back toward the safety of the suite. You're a werewolf, I said, the words sounding insane even as I looked at him. The wolf let out a low, mournful sound, almost a sigh. He looked toward the woods, where dozens of glowing eyes were emerging from the tree line. The investors. They weren't here for a merger. They were here for a challenge. Lucien nudged my hand again, his teeth gently grazing the diamond. I realized then what he had tried to tell me. The ring wasn't just a symbol for the humans. It was a claim. It was a beacon that told every predator in these woods that I belonged to the Alpha King. And tonight, every single one of them wanted to see if the king was still strong enough to keep me. Go, I whispered, my hand trembling as I stroked the coarse fur on his neck. Do what you have to do. He let out a final chest-shaking roar that echoed across the valley, a warning to any who dared approach. Then with a single leap he vanished over the balcony and into the dark, heading straight for the shadows in the trees. I stood alone on the balcony, the blue light of the ring pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I wasn't just a journalist anymore. I was the mate of a monster, and the night had only just begun. The forest was a symphony of violence. From the safety of the balcony, I heard the sounds of the merger, not the clinking of champagne glasses, but the snapping of bone and the earth-shaking roars of beasts. I clutched the stone railing, my knuckles white, staring into the swaying pines. Every few minutes the ring on my finger would pulse. A soft, rhythmic blue light that felt warm against my skin. It was a tether. I could feel him out there, a strange, tugging sensation in my chest that pulled me toward the darkness. I knew when he was winning. I knew when he was hurt. He can't hold them all off forever. I spun around. Juliana stood in the doorway of the suite. She wasn't shifted, but she looked different. Her eyes were glowing a steady, predatory amber, and her fingernails had lengthened into dark, curved points. The council is divided, Arielle, she said, stepping into the moonlight. Half of them want to follow Lucien because he is the strongest. The other half, they think a king who tethers himself to a human is a king who has forgotten his nature. He's protecting me, I shouted, my voice cracking. That's the problem, Juliana hissed, moving with a blurring, inhuman speed until she was inches from me. An alpha should be protected by his pack, not wasting his strength shielding a girl who can't even scent a hunter until his teeth are at her throat. She reached out, grabbing my left hand. Her skin was like ice. She stared at the pulsing ring. Do you even know what this is? It's a soul bind. He poured his own essence into this stone to mark you. Every time he fights tonight, he's weaker because he's sending his power to you to keep you hidden from the others. My heart stopped. The ring wasn't a shield for me, it was a drain on him. If you keep wearing it, Juliana whispered, they will kill him. Marcus is old, but he is patient. He will wait until Lucien is exhausted from keeping you safe, and then he will take the crown. And you'll be a trophy for the man who kills your lover. How do I stop it? I demanded, tears blurring my vision. How do I give him his power back? Juliana's smile was cruel. Take it off. Break the tether. If you reject the claim, the power returns to the Alpha. He'll be a god again. But the moment you take it off, you'll be unclaimed property. Anyone can hunt you. I looked at the ring. The blue light was flickering now, growing dim. Somewhere in the woods, A pained, familiar howl tore through the air. My heart wrenched. He was hurting. He was dying because he was trying to be my shield. I don't care about the hunt, I said, my voice steadying. I grabbed the diamond. It resisted, the metal feeling as though it were part of my very bone. I pulled, a sharp, searing heat rushing up my arm. With a final, desperate tug, the ring slid off. The blue light exploded in a silent flash, a wave of energy rushing out from the balcony and toward the forest. The silence that followed was deafening. Then a roar erupted from the woods, a sound so powerful it shook the foundations of the estate. It wasn't a roar of pain. It was a roar of absolute, terrifying dominance. Juliana stepped back, her eyes wide with genuine fear. He's coming. And he's furious. Good, I whispered, though my own blood ran cold. I was no longer claimed. I was a human alone in a house of monsters. I heard footsteps in the hall, not Lucien's. These were heavy, hurried. Multiple men. I looked at Juliana, but she had already vanished into the shadows of the room. The door to the suite was kicked off its hinges. Silas stood there, his shirt gone, his chest covered in fresh claw marks. He looked at my bare hand and grinned, a row of sharpened teeth gleaming. No ring, Silas rasped. The Alpha has abandoned his prize. Or the prize was too smart to stay on a sinking ship. He didn't abandon me, I said, backing toward the balcony edge. He's coming for you. Maybe. But I'm faster. He lunged. I closed my eyes, preparing for the end, but the impact never came. Instead, there was a sound like a freight train hitting a wall. I opened my eyes to find the room filled with the scent of ozone and scorched earth. Lucien stood between me and Silas. He was back in his human form, but he was changed. His skin was matted with blood and dirt, and his eyes weren't gray anymore. They were solid, glowing gold. The air around him distorted with sheer physical heat. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't even shift. He simply grabbed Silas by the throat and lifted the massive man off the ground with one hand. You touched what is mine, Lucien said, his voice a low, demonic growl that didn't sound human at all. She took off the ring. Silas gasped, clawing at Lucien's arm. She rejected the claim. Lucien's gaze flickered to me for a fraction of a second, a look of such raw, agonizing heartbreak that it nearly destroyed me. Then he looked back at Silas. She didn't reject me, Lucien said. She saved me. But you don't get to be saved. With a flick of his wrist, he threw Silas across the room and through the heavy oak wardrobe, the wood splintering like matchsticks. Lucien didn't even look to see if the man was breathing. He turned to me. The gold in his eyes was fading back to gray, but the intensity remained. He looked at my bare hand, then at me. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered, his voice trembling. I told you to keep it on. No matter what. You were dying, I said, stepping toward him. I reached out, touching the blood on his shoulder. I couldn't let you give your life for a lie. He grabbed my hand, pulling me flush against his chest. He was shaking. The powerful, untouchable Alpha King was shaking. It stopped being a lie the moment I saw you in that office, Arielle, he groaned, burying his face in the crook of my neck. I didn't choose a fiancé for a retreat. My wolf chose a mate for a lifetime. I just didn't know how to tell you that you were being hunted by my world. I know now, I said, wrapping my arms around him. But as we stood there, the sounds of howling outside changed. It wasn't the sound of battle anymore. It was the sound of a pack mourning. Or a pack preparing for a new execution. The retreat wasn't over. And the council was waiting at the edge of the woods for the king to bring out his queen, or his corpse. The dawn was a bruised purple, bleeding over the horizon as Lucien led me down the grand stone staircase of the estate. He didn't hide me behind him anymore. Instead, he held my hand, our fingers interlaced so tightly it felt as though our bones were fusing. The great hall's doors were thrown wide. The investors, the survivors of the night, were gathered in a massive semicircle on the lawn. They were no longer in suits. They were half-shifted, scarred, and covered in the dust of the forest. At the center stood Marcus, his arm in a crude sling, his face a mask of bitter defeat. Lucien stopped at the edge of the stone terrace. The air was deathly still. The challenge is over, Lucien's voice rang out, a bell of pure authority that brooked no argument. The claim was tested. The blood was shed. And the alpha remains. She rejected the ring. Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. By the laws of the founding, she is unclaimed. She is a breach in our security, Lucien. A human who knows our faces. She must be silenced. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I felt the heat in Lucien's hand flare. He stepped forward, pulling me with him until we were at the very edge of the stairs. She didn't reject the claim, Lucien said, his voice dropping into that terrifying low frequency. She gave me back my strength so I could finish the slaughter. She acted with the instinct of a Luna before she even knew the word. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the diamond ring. In the early morning light, it looked like a shard of the sun. I didn't buy this ring to trick her, Lucien addressed the pack, his gaze sweeping over them until every head bowed. I bought it because the moment she entered my life, the beast in me went silent for the first time in 30 years. She is the anchor. She is the heart of this pack. And if any of you wish to silence her, you will have to go through the throat of your king. He turned to me then. The gold in his eyes was gone, replaced by a tenderness so profound it made my throat ache. He went down on one knee, not as a stunt, not for a corporate image, but as a man surrendering to his only truth. Arielle Stone, he whispered. I brought you here under a lie. I put you in the path of monsters because I was too selfish to let you go. But you are the only story I want to write for the rest of my life. Will you take the claim? Not as a secret and not as a lie, but as my queen. The silence of the forest was absolute. I looked at the men who wanted me dead, then at the man who had nearly died for me. I realized that my life as a city journalist was over. That world was small, gray, and safe. This world was terrifying, but it was vivid. I'm going to need a really good laptop for the estate, I whispered, a small smile breaking through my fear. And you're going to have to explain the dental plan for werewolves. Lucien let out a short, breathless laugh. He slid the ring back onto my finger. The moment it touched my skin, the blue light flared brighter than ever, a warm, golden blue hum that settled deep into my marrow. I looked out at the pack. They weren't growling anymore. One by one they dropped to one knee. Not out of fear of Lucien's claws, but in recognition of the claim. 1 month later. The New York office felt like a different lifetime. I sat at my desk, the diamonds sparkling under the fluorescent lights. My editor had asked about my fiancé, and I'd simply told her he was in the family business. The door to my office opened and Lucien walked in. He was back in his charcoal suit, looking every bit the high-powered billionaire. But when he closed the door and locked it, his eyes flashed that familiar, hungry gold. You're late for our lunch meeting, Mr. Vale, I said, leaning back in my chair. The board of directors was being difficult, he murmured, walking toward me with that predatory grace. He leaned down, his nose brushing my ear, his scent, pine, steel and home, enveloping me. They wanted to know when the new partner would be making her official debut. And what did the alpha tell them? He picked up my left hand, kissing the ring, then the pulse point of my wrist. I told them she's busy writing a new set of rules, he growled playfully, and that they'd better be ready to follow them. He pulled me into a kiss that tasted of fire and forever. I used to chase stories, looking for the truth in the dark corners of the world. But as Lucien held me, I realized I'd finally found the only story that mattered. I wasn't just surviving his world. I was ruling it. And so, the fierce city journalist became the heart of the world's most powerful pack. Arielle and Lucien's story reminds us that sometimes, the person we think is a monster is actually the only one willing to fight them to keep us safe. From the high-rises of Manhattan to the dark, ancient forests of the North, their bond proved that a true alpha doesn't just lead with his claws. He leads with his heart. Hungry for more heart-pounding shifts and fated claims? If you loved watching Lucien go from a cold-hearted CEO to a protective alpha king, make sure to hit that subscribe button on Tori's Wolf Fantasies. What was your favorite moment? Was it the reveal of the soul-bind ring, or the way Lucien defended Arielle in the Great Hall? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Thanks for listening to Tori's Wolf Fantasies. Stay wild and I'll see you in the next story.